Dustin, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We would love for you to start out with an overview of our topic today, and then we'll take it from there with questions.
Yeah, it's great to be with you all. Actually, I need to update my bio. I realized that we moved to Virginia a year ago, so we're in Northern Virginia now. But yeah, still with our two four-legged animals. But yeah, it's great to join you all. I really think it's impressive the work that you all are doing and educating folks. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'll just kind of I love to get into Q&A, but I'll kind of just give some top line remarks. I mean, I kind of see things, and I've done a lot of work on this here recently at the Heritage Foundation, kind of looking at the intelligence community. And so I kind of wanted to kind of unpack. I've seen you all put out some trivia here recently of kind of the creation of a lot of these apparatuses that we kind of currently know. And I think some folks have some vague or recollections of or movie references, especially when it comes to things like the CIA. But this really kind of stems out of World War II. There was during World War II, a lot of this stuff was kind of related to the office of the Secretary of War. There was the Office of Strategic Services, Strategic Services, OSS, was kind of like the preliminary pre-CIA, which was then established under the National Security Act in 1947. And that was essentially, moving a component of really trying to build an apparatus for the U.S.'s intelligence community. It was kind of that was the precursor. It was the Central Directorate of Intelligence was based out of the CIA. And so that really, kind of started everything. Now, the FBI, separate to that, was established in 1946 under the Department of Justice. But, there was kind of the preliminary tracks of the FBI stemmed back to, a lot of white collar and crime investigations that were, held throughout the 20s and 30s about establishing kind of a federal law enforcement agency, especially for cross state criminal cases. And especially back then, dealing with the mob, dealing with, some of the famous cases that we know of from the mobster class. But that was built in 1946 as a kind of a directorate underneath the U.S. Attorney General. And so what's important to kind of understand is like all these kind of have to infuse over the course of time. And so, the CIA, it has, I won't get into every one of their track records throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s. They have a lot, people would say successes in some cases, and they have a lot of things that people would say, they definitely had some flub ups or, some learning moments that really changed the community. Well, what really happened throughout the 60s and 70s was under J. Edgar Hoover, who ran the FBI for a long period of time, and between that and the CIA, Congress essentially in the 70s really started taking a keen look at what was being done to surveil U.S. citizens, possibly an abuse of power in many ways by the FBI and the CIA. And they held essentially this church committee was called, and it has its positives and negatives, but I think most people see it as what happened in 1978 was the establishment of the Foreign Intelligence essentially Act of FISA, which kind of builds a congressional oversight mechanism that really mandated how the CIA, the National Security Agency, which I hadn't mentioned, which does signals intelligence and collects electronic intelligence, wire, back then telephone type of calls or things over spectrum or radio, versus what the FBI could do from like a counterintelligence standpoint. So back then, heavily what the focus was on the Soviet Union and Russian spies and other adversaries that were trying to do nefarious things through intelligence routes. And so that really kind of bled over, essentially through the 80s to the end of the Cold War, all the way really, like I said, after the Cold War, you think of the Bureau for the most part now, people think of it primarily as a facet of counterterrorism. And this was where I'm kind of getting into 9/11 and how this kind of changed things. But, prior to that, the FBI was very much focused on kind of what you would say are white collar crimes, extremism. Think of, cases such as, the Waco in Texas back in the 80s and 90s. You think about some of the different standoffs. You think about the Unabomber. Some of these kind of big preliminary crime cases was handled by the Bureau, but that all changed. And the world changed on 9/11, and so that really established Then in the early 2000s, what ended up becoming was the other subject matter you wanted to touch on was the Department of Homeland Security, which was kind of a consolidation of a wide range of agencies, creation of others. And so everything from the United States Coast Guard to the creation of the Transportation Security Agency, which we all go through airports every single day, to Customs and Border Patrol and things that had been historically immigration related, sometimes under the Department of Justice and others. They all became consolidated in the Department of Homeland Security, including the United States Secret Service. And at the same time, the FBI essentially turned overnight from being this kind of white collar crime organization, targeted law enforcement, to having to become a terrorism fighter and really understanding the threats to the United States. And so really overnight, they established over the course of time, these joint terrorism task forces working with local law enforcement, state law enforcement. And then the CIA heavily moved in this bucket too. They were the first on the ground in Afghanistan in 2001. Think about Tora Bora and some of these the horse soldiers and everything like that. I mean, there was CIA moving in early and often into Afghanistan to essentially plan the opening operations of the military campaigns and taking out trying to hunt down Osama bin Laden. Which of course led to his culmination and being taken out during the Obama administration. So long story short, I said these agencies now have to kind of work in this cross function that was established after, in 2000, between what happened in 9/11, 2001, there was a commission done called the 9/11 Commission, as well as a commission that was done in the aftermath of the Iraq War that established essentially the failures of the intelligence community in the Department of Justice and the FBI that led to us missing some blinking markers as related to the 9/11 attacks and misrepresented intelligence as it related to weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And so that turned essentially into the creation of where I worked at, was the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which was a hotly debated topic because, again, you're talking about the CIA all the way back since 1947 had been kind of the standard bearer and still, kind of the beast of what people consider the intelligence community. But there was a recognition that there were missing markers of somebody that needed to consolidate intelligence or be a forcing fulcrum to help. Now, back then, I'm trying to even remember the number of agencies, but now we're sitting at 18 intelligence agencies. Some of them are, in the case of the CIA, is an independent agency in itself. But many of them others, fall under other directorates. So the FBI has an intelligence community component. The Drug Enforcement Agency has a component. The United States Department of Treasury and the Department of Energy all have intelligence components. But really trying to be able to consolidate this for the president, for decision makers, for Congress. And so that has been kind of a mixed bag because I think, in terms of some of the direction that ODNI was given by Congress and by the president. And so I don't think its story is done yet. And so that really leads us up to today, where, I think we've been, it's kind of post 9/11 landscape for 20 plus years. And it doesn't mean that terrorism has gone away. If anything, it's moved, farther down range from us. And our IC, is fighting each day to remove those threats from ever landing on our shores. But it doesn't mean that they're not trying still. And vice versa, though, we're now back rubbing up against large nation state threats that, really hadn't been seen to this posture since really the Cold War ended. And so you're seeing what's happening with Russia and Ukraine and the U.S. intelligence community there. And you're also seeing this, the big fight that we have essentially with a very growing and adversarial China. And so that's where I'll stop because, again, I want to make sure I can answer questions from folks. But there's a lot to unpack in any one of those camps, but I'm happy to go into detail.
Well, that was a great overview, and thank you so much for that. And I know we've got a lot of questions today, both from the audience and from our student panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to Tova, and we'll start out with Tova's questions.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and talking about this really important issue. I definitely have lots of questions. So first of all, talking about sort of the balance of powers, how are intelligence agencies sort of held accountable and then, within the government, and how do they hold other government agencies or branches accountable? What does that structure look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, FISA, it all really bases back to the Constitution in terms of not having a government that surveils its citizens improperly in terms of, search and seizures, but also at the same time with the underlying directive to protect Americans. And so those two naturally rub against each other. And you've seen that play out over case law and government, failures and successes for a long time, as I mentioned. But really, the establishment of FISA in 1978 really kind of dictates where we currently stand, and that has changed a bunch. Even, post 9/11, there was a measure passed called the Patriot Act, which essentially has been kind of dwindled down in many ways since then, because a lot of people, it was done in a time where we were trying to prevent future 9/11s. And so they gave a wide latitude and authorities that, Congress came to believe, were either abused or were too wide lacing that would, rub up against, those constitutional rights that we have. And so, through things like the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they have actually a civil rights, civil liberties office whose directive is to do this type of reports, to do transparency reports. We have inspector generals that do oversight of all these efforts. And really, when it comes down to it, especially nowadays, in terms of the oversight of the intelligence community, of how we make sure that we don't misproperly use those IC equities, is via the Attorney General and the DNI, and then with oversight from the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, including the Judiciary Committees. And so there's a lot of case law in the books. There's actually one of the major components of foreign collection is a FISA program called Section 702, which relates to the targeting of foreign intelligence overseas from a signals intelligence standpoint. And it's a really important tool. It's used heavily to be able to prevent terrorist attacks and understand a lot of cyber actors that are trying to threaten U.S. networks and critical infrastructure. And so all these kind of have to pair together, but there are multiple different oversight agencies that oversee this. The Bureau has its own equities. Where the Bureau runs into a lot of its issues, or what I think, misnomers at times, is they are the one unique agency, other than the other IC agencies, that has a directive and authorities to look at U.S. persons. Now, they have a dual hat kind of exercise, in the sense that they both have a law enforcement mechanism, but they also have a counterintelligence mechanism. And that counterintelligence mechanism is something that's people are always critically looking at, to try to understand how those, equities are used to target, say, a Chinese spy or a Russian spy. But it leads to even more, though, nowadays, is the old spy war type of fights we think of back with Russia and China or Cuba. Those have blended into something now that I don't think a lot of the IC would have foreseen. Is you've got legitimate businesses being used as intelligence collection tools, or your data and privacy being essentially harvested by adversaries for either current abuse or preparation for a battlefield down the road to occur. So that's where again, it's this constant struggle of how do we tackle those issues while making sure we protect our civil liberties.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your opinion, how would you evaluate the ability of the U.S. intelligence community to adapt to this rapidly changing technology? Because just from the outside, it just seems like even 20 years ago, the tools that were being used by terrorist groups or foreign governments are totally changing. And do you think it's possible for such a big governmental organization with such a bureaucracy to be able to adapt to that? From your experience, how confident do you feel about our ability to face these challenges?
I know there's a lot of work being done. I mean, I saw it firsthand. Now it's easier to say you're doing that work and put money towards it and lines of effort. If anything that the government struggles with is it's too darn big, in my opinion. To at times, that's not a bad or a good thing, or it's more of it is a constant struggle to keep everybody working and swimming in the right direction. And so there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of amazing commercial technology. And so, now you have this intersection too, where historically 60 years ago, the US government was, backboning the building of the internet or satellite technologies. Now look at, companies like SpaceX, leading the forefront of development. And that's a great thing in some ways. And in other ways, the U.S. Government kind of loses some of those tools in its toolbox, or people as well, to attract those type of people that are needed to do some of these interesting things that you mentioned. And so, I think the intelligence community is a little more nimble than, say, the Department of Defense. Again, DoD is trying to do a lot of good things all at the same time with very different enemies, different threat posture, and a big agency. And so anytime you have that, you're in terms of a broader bureaucracy, it slows things down. And that's the one struggle. And that's a people problem. That's an organizational management problem. And if you're not allowing the technologies to kind of develop that can be helpful to our warfighters, to our intelligence community, to our decision to be able to deliver, the intelligence or policy ideas that are needed for our policymakers, and that's a huge problem. And, I worry that in the case of, adversaries that I consider, such as China right now, they're eating our lunch when it comes to this. It doesn't mean that I want to prescribe the Chinese Communist Party's tactics in terms of their approach, because they have their own issues by all means. But it's something that if the U.S. doesn't really start turning that battleship here soon, I worry that we're heading in a very bad direction.
I see. Well, thank you so much for that assessment. And then I was curious, in your bio, you talk about how you spent time abroad in Israel studying Middle Eastern studies, Arabic, Hebrew. And I was curious, how did your time abroad affect your conception of the US intelligence communities at home? And just more generally, how does the structure of the US intelligence system compare to those of other countries? Is it pretty typical, or are there unique aspects to it?
Yeah, twofold on that. I mean, one, when I stepped off literally proverbial boat, in Israel, I had never left the United States before. So it was a culture shock for me, for like a kid from a farm in central Missouri. So if anything, I was just, I learned so much from watching, the Israelis are a fascinating culture, people, because of their history. I mean, same as the American history has led us, through the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II, to kind of build a backbone of who we are. They also have this, amazing, beautiful, torturous history of that land there, and in many ways, their military and the service culture that is built by mandatory service of male and females straight out of high school for 3 or 2 years, or if not more, and serving their country. It kind of just interesting to me because it blends into a more serious people when it comes to their schooling afterwards. A lot of the people I went to school with there at University of Tel Aviv, they were 24 or 25 years old by the time they stepped foot on campus, but they had been, working, Iron Dome missile batteries, taking down Katyusha rockets, at night, so it's something that, that's not something that an average student, where I went to Truman State University, experienced. But I think it brought a different level of character and confidence and maturity. And so anyways, that's one angle. The other angle that you mentioned, though, is what I came away from working at ODNI was the relationships that we have with our allies and partners, some more open than others, is the backbone of everything that we do. And it's that trust, it's the expertise that we provide. Now, what makes the U.S. different than a lot of other countries I sees is we are massive, a mammoth. And so where we have 18 agencies, I mean, you're the most that you could probably find of like another one that you could find in a serviceable kind of comparison is maybe the UK, who has, different cyber directorates. They've got MI5, MI6, kind of similar, counterintelligence components and law enforcement components. But really most other countries kind of have just a central one type of intelligence agency. And that's kind of paired usually with their military in different types of fashions. But again, everybody's a little bit different. But what I did find really amazing, though, is we've got a lot of allies and partners that do amazing work in this space. And it's that trust and ability to work together quietly in the shadows of the night and understanding what our adversaries or people are doing to try to damage not only their country, but our country. And what we do a lot in the IC ourselves is to be able to shape and help other countries prevent terrorist attacks, prevent a lot of nefarious actions by things that I don't think that they could do without our assistance. So again, it's a backbone that doesn't get discussed as much, but it's something that I think I was always really impressed with, and so important for us to keep those types of connections and synergy with other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I feel like we often hear about intelligence as sort of the adversarial side about these countries that, we have to we have to be worried about, we need to combat. But yeah, you're so right that such a big aspect of it is building relationships with countries that we do have things in common with.
Well,
So
and we also at times sorry to interrupt. I mean,
no, please, please.
we kind of US kind of treats ourselves like we're the big dog on the block, and we have a ton of great technical expertise. But there's other countries that have amazing expertise and technologies in certain spaces, or people, or language, or you just name it. And so there's some things that we just don't do as well, and that's okay. And I mean, it's something for us to strive to do better on. But when we can work together on again, because I'm trying not to name names, but there are some countries that do stuff in the technology space, cyberspace. They can be, this little tiny country, but they hit, above their weight because of their technical expertise.
Right. Which kind of brings me to another thought I had, which is how do these intelligence agencies interact with diplomacy? For instance, the State Department. I'm sure they have to be very much in contact. But when is it decided? What is the interaction between the two? What is the communication, and how is it decided when a certain issue should be dealt with diplomatically versus more militarily?
Yeah, and
What
that's one thing I probably should have noted. I mean, the one thing to know about the intelligence community at large is that it's technically not what people would call a policy-making body. That comes down to policymakers. That comes down to the Secretary of Treasury. That comes down to the Secretary of Defense. That comes down to the Attorney General. Those are executors to action per se. What the IC is kind of built as is coming with a no holds barred intelligence, the best that we can do to understand what an adversary is thinking, what their directives are. And this goes, like I said, the military has its own components that are trying to help to make sure to protect warfighters or understand the environment they're going to be operating in on one side. You've got, CIA trying to understand, more broadly the actions and motivations of some of our biggest adversaries, and understanding what trends we want to see coming down the line. So it's it's a mixed tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another question I had was, uh, you know, speaking of terrorism and all of these issues, after, the Afghanistan and the Iraq wars, has there sort of been you alluded to this earlier, but has there been a reevaluation of, best practices in the intelligence communities? Are there any broad lessons that people in those communities are taking away in terms of evaluating our responses?
Yeah, there's of course, like I said, I mentioned earlier, like the inspectors general, do a lot of different oversight reports. That's, on one end of it, but there's also each one of the components of the IC kind of have these, ombudsman type, that are looking at analytical integrity, taking deep dive. There's, committees like there's the National Intelligence Council, which is like a directorate, underneath the Director of National Intelligence's office, whose job is to kind of try to glean all these different agencies' information into a synthesis for certain directives or taskings by the president or by somebody in the cabinet to understand X, Y, or Z. And they have a prescription literally kind of codified by the policy side of it to go back and look at previous intelligence analysis and see what was missed, what could we have done better. And again, it's kind of, you're always, I think the kind of the running joke, the IC is like you only know about IC failures. You don't really ever hear about their successes, and that's part of the point. But it also stinks for somebody who's in the IC. But it's a driving factor, not have any screw ups, and to make sure that you're learning from your mistakes, building a better IC. But again, you're also trying to prescribe at the end of the day. People brought this up about the Russia-Ukraine war that's happening. Generally, I wasn't there for what the underlying intelligence was in the lead up to that war, but generally the conventional wisdom around was that the Ukrainians were going to struggle to be able to withhold themselves and stay collected in a pushback from a military sense. That clearly wasn't the case. I mean, they definitely, and so there's an issue to an extent with trying to understand human motivation, and that's a hard thing to predict. Same as in Afghanistan. I mean, people, I think there was a lot of good people in the IC who could have told you, and I think did tell a lot of policymakers, as much as they try to say that they didn't, that things were going to go badly if you did X, Y, and Z, and that there was going to be a degradation in the feelings of the Afghan national forces and others, as they didn't have the ability to service equipment to be able to do the things that they needed to do to be able to fight the Taliban. And so again, you're always trying to go back and understand these things, and it's important not to just point fingers. It's important for accountability for those to be able to go forward and do the job better.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then I'll ask one more question since we have less people. I was wondering, the idea of the intelligence community as being sort of nonpartisan and having to work under sort of very different presidential administrations often. And so, I guess what's your general assessment of like the nonpartisanship? Like, what is it like maintaining operations under like very different presidential administrations, and to what extent does the daily work of the average intelligence community member change under different administrations, or is it more autonomous?
It's generally has been kind of autonomous. I mean, there's not a ton of Senate confirmed positions really in the per se intelligence community. I mean, a lot of it, in terms of the DoD side, a lot of them are flag officers. So there's kind of military leadership and some of the service agency branches, or even the Defense Intelligence Agency. But when you think about CIA, the DNI, the director, and the directors of ODNI and the CIA, those are Senate confirmed positions. And so again, technically political appointees, but yeah, it's one of those things people spill a lot of ink on this, but generally these people there most of the day are just trying to do their job the best they can in an environment that is hyper political. And so, it really takes the drive of the leadership and the motivation of mid-tier managers and others to make sure people feel like they're part of the discussion, part of the analysis, but making sure that they don't prescribe any types of political motivations into their analysis, because that's the last thing you want. And there has been issues about this in the past. There's been in terms of look at 2003, Rock WMD, in terms of making sure. That's why again, ODNI was created. It was trying to kind of shatter these heads together, because there used to be a big turf wars between, for example, the FBI and the CIA, who wanted to, both kind of had their own equities, and they were trying to kind of, and they weren't sharing information as much as they should. So, really, like I said, it is dependent upon strong leaders that want to drive good intelligence analysis and make sure that if they need to take the arrows politically, as political leaders themselves, technically, they work for the president of the United States. The president has the ability to go task his DNI and say, I have these intelligence priorities and I need you to do X. The IC doesn't get to just throw its hands up and be like, I don't want to do that. That's not how the Constitution works. That's, so I get the rub, and I get you want a nonpartisan analysis, but at the same time, the president's the president of the United States. They should be able to drive the policy that they want, that they desire, and foreign policy they want to for the American people. And so it's, what the IC's job is to deliver analysis and those questions and answers that the policymakers need to do on Capitol Hill and the president of the United States to make good decisions and make sure they have well-informed decisions, not even good decisions. That's a bad way to describe it. They need to make well-informed decisions with the best information that they can.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for that really detailed assessment of all my questions. And I will now pass on to Jewel and Jordan.
All right, what a packed show of information. So thanks for answering everything quick, like how you've been. It's a big topic, I know, as we've figured out with 18 different organizations that we're discussing. But continuing right where we left off, do you know if anyone who works in any of the intelligence community in any capacity takes an oath to the Constitution or anything like that?
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every officer does. I mean, it's kind of, yeah. I mean, they used to do for new hires, and I did it myself. You know, in the lobby there at ODNI. Yeah, we took oaths. I mean, similar to the military. I mean, again, we serve, the Constitution of the United States. We don't serve, and that, again, that protection of it is near and vital. And once you lose that, lose it as your focus, you're going to stink at your job, and you're not doing, a good service to your country. And if you can't be doing that, or you bring in your own motivations that are outside of that oath, my view is to get the heck out of Dodge.
And then if you're so exactly that, right next from there. So the IC takes its directives from the executive branch. So you said that you really are an arm of the power of the executive branch, meaning the president, which means there's going to be a political will or agency always in perpetuity. So if at some point then you think, okay, my directive, regardless of my opinion on if I like it or not, it's gone to the point where I think the directive is unconstitutional, then the concept is, on your own honor, you would resign? Or are you supposed to somehow, is there a mechanism of actually uh, fighting it in a way of like in a court type of manner of saying this was given to me to do and it was wrong?
Yeah, there's a wide bevy of things. I mean, the U.S. Congress has established a ton of different whistleblower protections. You can whistleblow to the U.S. Congress, to, committees of jurisdiction. You can whistleblow anonymously to Inspector General. I mean, and so there are actual proper track ways to do it. What I get annoyed at is when I read something in the New York Times. I mean, again, there are proper channels to do this, especially in the national security sense, because a lot of it ends up leaking like classified information, or it doesn't give you the whole picture. And so to me, sometimes those are just as politically motivated by the person than they are like the actual complaint itself. So you need to be able to, kind of dig through and parse through real legitimate issues. And again, there are ways that you can do that are built into the system. But what I meant is, like, at the end of the day, you don't the president is the unitary executive. Like, there's not the ability to just, throw your hands up and be like, I disagree, I'm not going to do that. But again, if it means, like you said, you feel like you're violating that oath, and there's mechanisms for you to go take that and adjudicate that, I believe, in a proper way that should be done in a timely manner. And like I said, so I mean, that I feel like there's pretty good guardrails in there right now.
And then do you know if as far as when we talk about intelligence, a long time ago, if we watched an old movie, that meant one thing. Maybe there's a guy undercover and he's gathering intelligence and reporting it back. But now so much is technology. Could you try to break down it as briefly as possible, the ambiguous term of intelligence from a technological standpoint, and how that's gathered, what's done with it?
Yeah, I think a good way to put it, there's different types of ints, so different types of human. So it's short for like human intelligence. And that's kind of probably the oldest intelligence, that there is. And that essentially is a component of I am going to go gather knowledge of policy or weapon systems or motivations or directives of an adversary or a non-adversary, of understanding the motivations that are going to drive decisions or military action by somebody. And that's, probably, like I said, it's like the oldest of the ints. But then, I mean, there's so many now. I mean, like, so there's electronic intelligence. But the big ones, like what SIGINT is what they call it, signals intelligence. And this goes back all the way, to the World War I, World War II time set. Think about trying to think about all the cryptology that was done, in terms of trying to steal cryptology from U-boats and from, the Germans to understand communications. Those are all part of a track record that are, like, especially our kind of keystone on that is the National Security Agency. They, in terms of trying to understand motivations via things that are collected electronically. So email, text messages, phone calls, from foreign adversaries or foreign intelligence, that's their directive and motivation, is to collect their There is GeoInt. So essentially, like, think about looking at, maps and imagery, satellites flying over, 5 miles a second, across the sky, to balloons now, balloons at the, stratosphere, looking down, again, picking up imagery and understanding, missile silos, trying to pick up, other types of intelligence. So yeah, like there's, those are some of the ways to think about it, is trying to gather all this data, and then parse through it to glean a picture of what may be happening, and then try to give recommendations intermixed with historical precedent of information that you already have, and try to prescribe what the hell it means.
When you had mentioned something about some of our adversaries, like China, who has been aggressive in intelligence, and you said be eating our lunch in some ways. Could you say some of what we need to do better as far as that goes, and what we're facing, and what would be dangerous about that? I had seen a report that they may even be spying on us through shipping and mapping out, what the goods in and out of the country through devices at the shipping containers. And I've seen there's many stories like that where it's saying it's just possible they're doing this or that, but from someone in the intelligence community, what are we to understand by it? Because it's a bit of a phantom when you just talk about, when we just hear China, this or that all the time.
Yeah. One thing I would recommend reading, and it's the best place to get unclassified understanding of where the intelligence community sits on a lot of big items like this. The ODNI puts out a yearly unclassified annual threat assessment. It's called they do the ATA. They always testify before the House and Senate intelligence committees about it. But yeah, from the top line, exactly like you said, and this is why it's hard, like, trying to describe it to China, because like I said, you hear a different nugget each day and you're like, oh, that sounds concerning. But I'm talking about trying to, like, think about that whole picture of all those different little each day stories and put them all together, and you're like, oh man, that's bad. Because when the FBI director says, the between cyber militia, government tasked cyber actors in China there are more of them than any other country in the world, including the United States, but like anybody else in the world combined. There are more cyber officials looking at ways to do economic espionage, hack and leak operation types of operations, obscuring their tracks through making it look like another country trying to do something, targeting industrial, defense industrial basis. And as you mentioned earlier too, there's concerns on things like Huawei and TikTok. I mean, so these are real things. That's all. I mean, and again, the ODNI report does a really good job of prescribing that in detail. And there's been some more now open source stuff coming out here. I think one of the challenges the intelligence community has, a lot of it is because a lot of it is secret. And naturally so, you want to protect the sources and methods in which you achieve this information. But I do, and I think, my former boss, DNI Ratcliffe, said this too. His dual directive as the DNI also, though, just as much it is to be the president's chief intelligence advisor, he also is one of the unique ones designated by Congress to also be able to say this information is in the public interest. Like, and so signal ways, and there's ways to properly then go and like downgrade information or make it unclassified, or declassify information as needed to be able to share it with partners, allied partners. There was a large effort to do, to declassify information, to share it with Ukraine and NATO and stuff ahead of, say, like, hey, and then not only that too, it's not just sometimes like U.S. intelligence. Like, we actually have, that's what, one of the other areas of intelligence we talked about is commercial intelligence. There's companies like Maxar Technologies, which is a commercial satellite company doing imagery, who was just taking pictures of all these Iskander missile systems being placed, on the border of Ukraine and in Belarus. What are you doing there? So, those are things that, and those have diplomatic tool approaches, because it also signals for the diplomacy guys and the actual policymakers to say, we know what you're doing and you better stop it, or we're going to do sanctions. We're going to do that. Clearly that didn't work there. So, again, these things are a mixed bag.
I'm curious about is there any kind of pecking order within the intelligence community? Like, is the military above the CIA, and how do they work? because it seems like certain divisions are separated, but if you're, in the Navy, you're going to be coming into human intelligence, technology. So how does that work? How do they commingle?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the big questions that you're always trying to solve if you're the director of national intelligence, is how do you get different agencies that sometimes do very different things who have turf wars? I mean, that's the thing too, is, we haven't talked a ton about the Department of Homeland Security. A lot of it was created with good intentions, but it's a big old mammoth. And it's like you have disparate agencies that do very different things. You have the United States Coast Guard, on one end, who's literally a military component that has a dual, service function as protecting, the U.S. coastlines and U.S. A lot of, do a ton of great work on counter narcotics. And then it's like intermixed with the United States Secret Service, who used to have, a financial white collar crime function that still kind of exists in cyber. And so you get a lot of different Indians, chiefs and Indians, kind of like, is like a way I put it. And trying to kind of get them to play well together is really tough. Now, the military, what I say, the DNI is supposed to be the head of the IC. Now, has that worked in practice? It's been difficult because at the end of the day, it's a small organization. Now, we're supposed to have very strong tools, supposed to be given directives by the president to be able to go in and knock heads and make sure you don't see things that happened with like the FBI and CIA ahead of 9/11 happen again. But at the same time, you have these big disparate, IC agencies. So you have like the CIA, who's got the historical big dog on the block, kind of like, we don't care about you guys. Now, this is a little dirty secret is that they all will go up to these different forums all together and say, we play nice with each other. We do all these things. And for the most part, people are professionals, and there's a lot of good work and collaboration done. But there are turf wars, there are disagreements. Now, it's all about trying to solve those equitably and make sure that if there's something that somebody's doing something and dragging their feet that's causing an issue, that you break it. And that's my view is like having a DNI that's able to go in and say, okay, DOD, you have these equities, CIA, you have these equities, you're not getting along, but you're going to fix it right now at this table, and I don't want to hear about it again. You kind of have to have somebody at the end of the day that gets the guys in the room. But I think it's still a struggle. I really do think it's still a struggle for the IC at large, because, these different equities have very different resources and history.
Gotcha. So, look, we're in a day and age where, everything's listening to you. All your information's collected. I talk about a TV. I get ads about TV on my phone. Google's tracking everything. But so how does an intelligence agency protect themselves against that data consumption? Do they have their own networks? How do they do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because your secrets are only as good as the protection of those secrets. And there's a constant war out there happening in the shadows all the time of people trying to steal those things. And that's not just in the IC, that's throughout, a lot of our commercial partners that do stuff in the defense space. You probably see headlines each day about somebody getting hacked. Their Office of Personnel Management got hacked, Equifax got hacked. You kind of lose track in your mind. You're like, another hack. But that's valuable information. Data really is king. And so trying to protect, good example was I was at ODNI when, if anybody's heard of the SolarWinds attack. Essentially, it was a kind of a supply chain software attack done through like an update to an existing software that exists on a lot of people, government and non-government computers. But it allowed essentially the Russians to be able to come in, backdoor. And this wasn't being used for to go break things. It was used for intelligence gathering. And so, but they were in at least, they were in multiple U.S. cabinet agencies, including, it's been reported that they were able to, they had access to the Secretary of Homeland Security's emails. Again, these are on the unclassified side, but again, it shows you the threat and danger. So a ton of resources and time are spent to protecting those kind of classified type of networks. But one of the big threats that you all should know about is with the creation and look at the advancements that you all know about in terms of AI, but quantum, the future of quantum computing and the ability of possibly quantum computers breaking the current encryption that tries to protect your data. So when you send that signal message, or you're sending an email that you believe is end-to-end encryption, there are concerns that China, especially, and others are seeking to gain ground or beat the United States to what essentially is kind of like Q Day, where they would have the ability to break kind of modern day encryption to be able to, glean those secrets. And that's well known, and it's a race to be able to, for these countries, including the United States, to try to reach that quickly, and also build in mechanisms. So the Biden administration and the Trump administration both put in kind of actions to kind of try to get ourselves in order, but we're still behind the 8 ball. They want to try to move a lot of these national security systems and kind of prioritize them before 2035 to post quantum encryption. So they're developing algorithms that could be, could not be broken by a quantum computer in theory, because like those are already still being challenged by the advancements, for example, you're seeing with like ChatGPT and AI. So these are some really technical, scary things that I think we're going to have to grapple with, and it's going to change warfare. It's going to change intelligence, because you'll be able to take, large data sets and be able to do all kinds of things with the data. Think about too, what they're going to be just on the AI side about deep fakes. I mean, the fact is, like, China, there's commercial uses for this by all means, but they can deep fake a news reporter to deliver essentially CCP delivered news each night, and it's not a person. It is a computer built AI deep fake to deliver the nightly news and deliver the message to the CCP. And other people are going to use these things. I mean, I heard today a crazy story about, Levi, jeans is going to start using, AI models instead of paying a model to model their jeans. And so, I mean, technology is going to move at a rapid tick right now. I think the opening of ChatGPT is going to change things.
All right, thank you. I think it's time for some audience questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Kathy.
Well, thank you, Jewel and Jordan, and thank you, Tova. Those are some great questions. And Dustin, this has just been such an enlightening episode. And first of all, we want to welcome all of our listeners from KKVV in Las Vegas. KKVV is airing our programs on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern. And you can listen if you're in Las Vegas on 1060 AM, or you can go to www.kkvv.com and listen. Click the listen live button if you want to hear any part of this program again. We also want to highlight a few of our students today, and most especially we want to welcome Deborah DeMeo, who's watching, who's a homeschool student. And welcome, Deborah. We're so glad to have you watching today. Now, Dustin, I think you've covered this pretty well, but we've had a couple of listeners. I just want to make sure that we've answered this question. Muhammad was asking, is the president in charge of the CIA? And then John was asking about the authority of the FBI. And John asks, who directs their actions, such as the raid on President Trump's home? Who can actually order this? So who, and I think we're getting to this a little bit, but does the buck stop with the president on both the CIA and the FBI?
Yes. In theory and practice, I don't know if that is always, again, it's up to the president to kind of take this directive. But yeah, I mean, everything that falls in those executive functions that, they are delineated from the U.S. Constitution by the president of the United States. Now, with a ton of, history and institutions that have been built and congressional actions and Senate confirmed appointees. But at the end of the day, the president controls the executive branch, and his chief of staff doesn't get to order. Again, it all controls and flows from the president of the United States. That's my opinion, and maybe some people have different constitutional, but it's cleaner and easier to understand it from that sense, in my opinion. And as soon as you all of a sudden have independent players outside of the president and the Constitution directing actions on their own fruition, that is a scary outcome, regardless of what you think about the mechanisms of the presidency's actions. So there's constitutional repercussions for presidents that abuse those types of authorities or tools or by impeachment. I mean, that is a tool and function of the U.S. Constitution that was built for that purpose. But yes, so when it comes to this, they have definitely oversight on the CIA. The FBI director reports to the U.S. Attorney General. That is their boss. Now, it is kind of its quasi Congress established the FBI director to 10-year terms. And that's really kind of, it was supposed to be built in as a motivation to make sure that the direction of the Bureau wasn't dictated by essentially the political cycle at hand. And that's been, I can't quite remember exactly when that was initially established or if that was always established from its history, but that's generally the way that, the Bureau, but in terms of that, the Bureau kind of has this interesting function, in the sense that they're kind of in its own little independent agency, but yeah, they definitely report to the U.S. Attorney General. A lot of times it's as a law enforcement function, an investigative function, they have to work collaboratively with the Department of Justice. And so when it comes to U.S. attorneys, the field office in Miami or the field office of the FBI in Jacksonville, Florida, has to then counteract with a U.S. Department of Justice, usually a U.S. attorney that's based out of, say, like the Northern Florida district on investigation. So they work in tandem to be able to deliver charges, to do investigations, to build cases, and go execute, a warrant. So, in the case of like Mar-a-Lago, that is in conjunction with a U.S. Department of Justice exercise and lawyers as part of the counterintelligence division that were leading that investigation, that then laid the directives for the Bureau to execute and go to make that case to a judge to execute that lawful warrant.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure that answers our audience's questions in a little bit more depth. John also says John says, I'm glad Dustin is from the show me state. So I thought you'd appreciate that comment. Yeah. And then Mayberry says, Dustin provided an authoritative, intelligent, and valuable overview with astute insights. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And then Tracy asks, with 18 intelligence agencies, how do they share information and not fall victim to silos where important information might be missed if it was able to be linked with other information?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That was kind of the outcome of 9/11. Exactly was exactly that. And so at the ODNI, they're what we call them. There's kind of two big tranche functions, but one of them first is the creation and delivery of the president's daily brief. So in terms of delivering the intelligence to the president in the way in which he wants to be given that intelligence, via paper or electronically, or through kind of briefings. Separate function, though, is this kind of the National Intelligence Council and what we call the National Intelligence Managers function, and its ability for these different functions to see kind of the big picture through all these different disparate networks of 18 agencies and look at pockets that need to be answered. And so there's, a National Intelligence Manager for aviation, there's a National Intelligence Manager for East Asia, and they are going through and trying to, again, bust down those silos, see where there's questions that are not being answered, either questions from the Director of National Intelligence or from a function of the Secretary of Defense or others that are not being answered, and make sure that those things are broken down, and also that resources are being directed properly to make sure that you're actually going to tackle the questions that the president wants answered. And so a lot of ODNI's function and the way it was used to essentially create the apparatus for the other guys in the 18 agencies to play ball with each other was they control the creation of what they call the NIP, the National Intelligence Program. And there's also the Military Intelligence Program. That is like the funding stream for all of the IC. So everything that goes through the Office of Management and Budget essentially has to go through ODNI as kind of like the referee amongst all the agencies to say, are you tackling the priorities of the president's intelligence framework? And these are the way that we're going to do these fundings. And so a lot of it's kind of horse trading, but those are really important functions to make sure too that those guys, the best as they can play ball with each other. I think it could be improved upon, because I still think that some people kind of play the system, and then they, if they don't get what they want, they go up to Capitol Hill, just like any other agency, and they quietly complain behind the scenes to an appropriator and say, hey, beef that line back up. So you're also that's part of the constitutional sausage making.
Well, thank you. And we are right at the top of the hour, and we just want to thank you so much for your great answers today and all of your insights. And I want to toss it back over to Tova and Jewel and Jorn for any closing comments or that you all may have.
Yeah, just wanted to thank you again for giving us your hour to be here. I personally learned so much, and I hope everyone watching did as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for a great show.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's great having you on.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, thank you, Dustin. And we thank all of our audience, and we invite you to join us next week, Tuesday at 2 Eastern. And we're going to be talking about the military complex. Is it ready? So we're looking forward to that show, and we will see you all next week. And thank you again, Dustin.
Thank you.
Bye.